Hi everyone, I'm Oriel Befraguas, and this is my video to get the New York State Civic Seal. Today I'm talking to you about the human rights violations. I'll be looking back into two historical examples and the modern day example, with my two historical examples being the suppression of indigenous cultures and languages in Spanish America, and the suppressions of Slavic languages in the Holy Roman Empire. Each of these examples will show how authorities have used cultural and linguistic control through human rights violations as a tool for domination. So let's start with Spanish America. During the 16th through the 18th century, Spanish conquerors subjugated indigenous peoples such as the Aztecs, Maya, and Inca by forcibly imposing Spanish language, religion, and culture. Indigenous communities were coerced into converting to Catholicism. The languages were put to the side and suppressed, and native customs were basically erased by the Spanish state. These actions weren't random actions of harsh rules, but were calculated measures to consolidate Spanish imperial power and economic control, essentially violating the basic human rights of those indigenous peoples by denying them the freedom to express their own identity. Despite these brutal realities, indigenous peoples adapted in incredible ways. They blended their ancient rituals with Catholic practices through syncretism, which allowed them in private and sometimes even publicly to preserve their cultural heritage. Through cultural policies brought widespread destruction, the survival and recent revival of indigenous cultures show that even after long periods of time, suppressed languages and cultures can still reemerge even after long times of suppression. Through the through the human rights violations imposed to them by Spain. Excuse me. Then let's move on to Central Europe. During the period of the Holy Roman Empire, Slavic populations, including groups like the Czechs and the Poles, found themselves under a regime that demanded linguistic and cultural uniformity. And the German was enforced as the language of government, education, and public life. Native Slavic texts were banned, and cultural institutions faced relentless pressure to conform through, military suppression. They would get killed if they didn't do it. This suppression wasn't merely about language, though. It was about erasing a people's soul and identity, which is a basic human rights violation, in order to spread their dominance and to bring into one unified German with one cultural identity. However, the Slavic peoples weren't silenced. They responded covertly by establishing underground schools and preserving old literature in secret. Over time, these acts of resistance laid the groundwork for later nationalist revivals, including leading to the restoration of their languages and cultural pride. The struggle of the Slavic communities shows how state-imposed cultural erasing not only infringes on human rights violations, but also it plants the seeds for a determined comeback, which was shown as Slavic languages, such as shown before, like the Czechs and the Poles, still very existent now, that they were able to survive through the suppression and eventually lead to them having their own identity now in modern day Czechia and Poland. And finally, let's move on to the modern day example in Catalonia. It's a region in Spain, an independent that wants its own independence. They've been facing multiple human rights violations, which is something that shouldn't be seen by now in the 21st century, and especially in first world countries. I'm sorry, mind my dog, please. Anyways, On October 1st, 2017, Catalonia held an independence referendum that was met with a violent crackdown by Spanish National Police. The events of that day remain unforgettable. The police clashed with voters, ending up with many left dead and severely injured on the streets of Barcelona, Girona, Vigo, and many other places, though mostly Barcelona. So that's the capital of Catalonia. They also forcibly seized the ballots of that independence referendum, which they consider illegal. The Spanish state considered illegal, and the vote people had to then hide the ballots from the police after the voting was done to be able to properly count the votes before they would take away before they would take them away. So most were never taken away, luckily, but there were many that were taken away, and many votes that ended up not counting. The election ended up with a 97% majority independence anyways, though. One of the people who helped with conserving these ballots is somebody named Conchita Boldu. She is my godmother, and she's the former mayor of this town in Catalonia called Blanes. She risked her life, she risked her family's protection to be able to preserve the identity of this, and she shouldn't have had to. She should have been able to safely count them, she shouldn't have had to hide them, but due to the human rights violations committed on the day, they had to take measures to ensure that they could still count the ballots while still ensuring the safety of the counters, so they had to hide them. I actually was there. I was 7 years old during the independence referendum. I remember distinctly that my mom did vote yes for independence. Luckily, our ballot station in Passeig Sant Joan, which is in Barcelona, did not get attacked on the day, and for what we know, the ballot also did not get stolen from the place where we went to vote. But yeah, this day exposed how the Spanish state was determined to silence Catalonia through a crackdown of a referendum that it considered illegal, even though constitutionally people are allowed to go and vote for stuff like this. And the repercussions didn't just stop on October 1st, 2017. Afterwards, pro-independence politicians were forced into exile, such as Carles Puigdemont and others who sought refuge abroad in countries like Belgium and Switzerland to avoid arrest and prosecution by the Spanish state. Most, however, though, were not quick enough and were sent to jail in Spain, where they stayed there being malnutrition and treated unfairly until the amnesty law passed in 2023 under a deal between the Spanish Socialist Party and the Independentist parties to allow most of these pro-independentist politicians out of jail. However, most were never allowed back into office, and a lot of the people who went into exile were not pardoned, such as Carles Puigdemont, which he was the main guy running all of this election stuff. So, sadly. But anyways, meanwhile, the Spanish government continued to stifle democratic rights by enacting laws that suppress the Catalan language in schools, enforcing policies that diminish Catalonia's cultural identity in favor of Castilian Spanish and Spanish traditions. These legal restrictions are about an example, again, of cultural suppression through many of these human rights violations, by denying the people to learn stuff and do their schooling through their mother tongue, Catalan. Anyways, beyond the referendum and language policies, there have been many cases of maltreatment of Catalan convicts, going back to as what I was saying before, that many activists and political figures endured harsh sentences and inhuman treatment. And it drew a lot of international condemnation. Many there was one UN resolution that was passed that basically said that a lot of the stuff that what Spain did during this referendum and afterwards were blatant human rights violations against Catalans, and that was also a factor that led towards the amnesty law. And it also shows that the Spanish state infringed on people's civil rights by using tools like Pegasus spyware to monitor many key Catalan leaders, journalists, and activists. And in the political arena, several pro-independence parties such as Junts per Catalunya, Esquerra Republicana, and CUP have mobilized rapidly. They not only unite diverse segments of Catalan society, but also help keep the cultural and linguistic freedoms that are trying to be suppressed by the Spanish state, as well as some neo-Nazis parties within Spain, such as Vox and Pepe. These groups, along with a lot of other organizations and independent voices, are trying to campaign their best to either full independence or greater autonomy as a means to restore human rights within Catalonia. They argue that when a state suppresses its own people's expression through human rights violations, whether through violent referendums or draconian educational policies, it commits a grave injustice, one that undermines democracy itself. And it isn't just Catalonia. Similar measures and stuff are seen in other parts of Spain, such as in the Basque Country and in Galicia, where similar stuff such as suppression of cultural identity and languages within schools have been seen to try to make it a more homologous Spain under one language, one culture, sadly. And it still shows us how it even connects to how Spain used to do it to the people in in the Americas, and now it's being acted upon again in the modern day within Catalonia. But this is just not, in Catalonia, it's not just about the independence, it's about the fundamental rights for people there to be able to live, learn, and express themselves. And this serves as a big warning of how human rights violations are still happening within the 21st century. Even though it's this enduring issue has been going on for so long within history. So my solution to this issue, personally, as a person from Catalonia, as Catalan, I believe that it's the only proper way to do this is full Catalonian independence under a democratic Catalan republic. Such a state would guarantee that our language, culture, and political freedoms would be indefinitely respected and protected. And this sort of thing wouldn't even be as a thing of political separation. It would be like a moral step to restoring our identity, to ensuring that no government ever again can silence our voices. And this can as well be as an example in the world that it is still possible to break from the chains of oppression. This isn't just about politics. It's about the human rights and the right to be who we are. And I believe that the only way to fix this in our example of Catalonia is independence. So, in conclusion, whether it's erasing the cultures of languages in Spanish America, the suppression of Slavic languages within the Holy Roman Empire, or today's violent repression in Catalonia, one thing is pretty clear. The cultural suppression is a violation of human rights that has been spanning centuries. This is an enduring issue that needs to stop. It's a fight for our right to speak, learn, and express our identity without fear. And I believe that until people can come together and unite and put an end to this, this will be a huge issue within human civilization that will be hard to take away. So, thank you for watching. And yeah, the sources are in the description for if you're interested. Thanks.